All right, half hour till lunch. Thank you guys for giving us your full attention. The next half hour, you're going to hear from individuals who are actually very instrumental in really building coalitions, changing public perception. So if you really want to change public perception here in Texas, you want to keep sustaining your operating fleets, and you want to keep expanding and building upon that, this is the panel to listen to. So we've already went through a round of introductions, so we'll save you on that and doing that again. And really, we were going to start in a little state called California. For those that don't know, Isabelle Boemeke to my left here was very instrumental, along with other panelists on this stage, in saving Diablo Canyon and ensuring that we retained its operational life, as well as expanding it. And so we want to hear directly from Isabelle to start on, really, you took a unique position on how you use a different medium. You use social media to really build a grassroots effort from the ground up, which is something we don't traditionally see. So I would love for you to tell a little bit about the origin story of how you got involved and what you did to make that a success story.
I'm going to try to make this really short because I know everybody's hungry. But essentially in 2019, inspired by the fires in Australia and the Amazon, I decided to use my social media platform to advocate for solutions to climate change, and decided to focus on nuclear because it was the only solution that I perceived as not having as much public support. And so I started making social media content, and about a year after I started this endeavor, I looked at all the power plants in the United States that were about to be shut down. And at the time, there were 5 of them. It was Diablo Canyon, a couple in Illinois, I can't remember all, and Indian Point as well. And I thought, Diablo Canyon, if we can save this plant, it will be so symbolic. Because Diablo Canyon, for those who don't know, was the birth, basically, of the anti-nuclear movement in the United States. Hundreds of thousands of people protested the plant from being built. And at the time, I went around and talked to all these pro-nuclear organizations, and they all told me, do not do it. It's a waste of time. It's a done deal. People have fought to keep this plant open before. But I realized that everything had changed in California. We had electric vehicle mandates, we had clean energy goals. So I thought there was an opportunity here to make this case. And little did I know that Armond Cohen here was also thinking about Diablo Canyon, and behind the scenes, working with some incredible scientists at both MIT and Stanford to do an analysis of keeping Diablo Canyon open, the impact on the grid in California's economy. And so that was the origin of this whole story. I don't know if you want me to expand on it.
No, that's perfect. And I love that it's a very diverse relationship that formed. So Armond, maybe chime in a little bit as well on, before Isabelle talks a little bit more about social media, but how did you say yes to her and say, yes, I'm going to actually take on this daunting task of saving a nuclear plant in California?
Is this mic on? Okay,
yes.
We're good. Yeah, so as Isabelle said, we were working on parallel paths, and she had been working the grassroots for years, building an incredible movement of pro-nuclear, I will say, younger people, and that's the generational issue is really interesting here. I'll get to that in a minute. Meanwhile, we were looking at it from the standpoint of just, what are the economics, what's the policy, and we converged, and we realized we were both working on it, and Isabelle really worked the population, so to speak. We did more of a kind of insider thing with polling, which we presented to the governor. We hired the governor's pollster, and everyone thought that California was anti-nuclear, right? But we actually polled the public and found that 60% of the public supported continued operation of Diablo Canyon, which I'm not going to claim that was the reason that Governor Newsom necessarily switched his view on this, but it certainly would give them more comfort, right? So, and then we made the usual economic arguments, and like Texas, California is facing reliability issues. So there was just a nice convergence of, I think, of public sentiment. The lesson I took away was that everyone thinks everyone else is anti-nuclear, but actually when you look at it, that's not true. You have a determined minority, and I used to be one of these people back in my misspent youth, who felt like nuclear was not a good technology to be deploying. But I think we're seeing a huge shift in that, in the generational pattern there. I thought there was some striking visuals from the hearings that took place in California where there's a lot of gray hair on the anti-side and a lot of youthful voices on the pro side. So I just think the general direction, is climate is an issue. It's more important than whatever concerns people might have about nuclear. The real issue that people are confronting these days, I think the real opposition is around economics, is why it's too expensive. And it's really not, except for a very small number of people, it is really not a fundamental gut ideological issue anymore. So I think we're actually on better ground.
Very helpful. Yeah, so maybe expand a little bit more, Isabelle, about the art of storytelling and how that really weaved into your ultimate campaign with Armond and others to get Diablo saved.
So my initial thinking was that the only way we could get this done is if we could convince Governor Gavin Newsom that A, it was a no-brainer to keep the plant open from an economic standpoint, from a reliability standpoint, but then also, in my opinion, obviously, because I focus on this area, it was to show that there would be public support. Because at the end of the day, public support might not be the thing that moves a politician forward, but at least he or she can use that to point to whenever they're making a decision. And so I focused on obviously doing a lot of online campaigning, posting a lot on social media platforms, and I also did a rally in San Luis Obispo, which is where Diablo Canyon is located. I had never done a rally before in my life, so I had no idea what the hell I was doing. But turns out you just go to the university and you talk to students. I happened to stand for hours outside of the Diablo Canyon power plant with Ryan Pickering, who is here somewhere, giving out flyers to the workers. And we threw this rally that ended up being the biggest pro-nuclear rally in the history of the country, which was incredible. And again, a lot of young people. It was mostly led by women. All the people that spoke were women. To me, that was also important to show that this movement is now being led by young and women. And
so true.
Right. As an example
no,
here.
Well, I chair U.S. Women in Nuclear, so we talk about this often, that there's like this bias, which is a positive one, towards women, that we have this trust triangle, right? Like, we're very authentic because we just don't know how to fake it sometimes. And then we're very empathetic naturally, always thinking about the person we're talking to and what is their vantage point and bias. And then just the logic behind, like, the why. Like, we're very good at getting to the purpose as to why we're in the room, because perhaps it's just decades of fighting through a male-dominated field. So I think that women-led story definitely had to play a part.
Definitely, especially in California, a state that values diversity. The other thing that my organization did was we put together a letter urging Governor Newsom to reconsider the decision to shut down the plant. And this letter was signed by 79 of the leading climate experts, energy experts, including a former Secretary of Energy, Stephen Chu. We also delivered that letter to Governor Newsom. And I think that my lesson from this all is that, it wasn't the rally that did it. It wasn't the letter that did it. It wasn't the MIT Stanford study that did it. It was the whole thing together. You have to push from all angles, and you have to show overwhelming evidence that this is the right thing to do and that there is public support. And I think when you have those two together, you have a win.
I just think of like the 1,000-piece puzzle on my dining room table right now. So you're just putting together those puzzle pieces. So speaking of storytelling, and honestly, I'm going to advocate that we get rid of Where's Waldo and we turn it into Where's Christine, because Christine here with Nuclear Energy Institute is very instrumental and works for NEI, one of our large trade associations, in getting boots on the ground, grassroots support at the state level. So Christine, I'm sure you got some crazy stories you could tell on top of the Diablo Canyon story on what you've been a part of in terms of not only sustaining our nuclear fleet, maybe also extending the life of our nuclear fleet, but also building and maybe flipping moratoriums.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate the question. And I love Isabelle's idea of the momentum, because that's exactly what we're seeing at the state level. So I've been tracking state legislation for about 15 years now. And when I first started the activity of just tracking state legislation, there was maybe 5 or 10 bills a year that said the word nuclear in them. And they were usually not even that useful or helpful to the industry or to nuclear in general. This past year and the last 3 years, we've hit over 100 bills a year. Last year, we hit 200 bills. And these are all pro-nuclear bills in state houses all over the country. It doesn't mean that they're passing. They're not. Last year, we had 20 states that took action. This year, we're at 23. So these bills aren't necessarily passing, but they're getting hearings. They're being talked about. They're being considered in state houses like never before. So we're seeing this momentum all over the country at the grassroots level, and I think that is really important important that we have to have that backbone. That's one of the resources that we have. But a lot of it is the expertise that comes from you all that are already in the industry. We need you to show up at these hearings and be present to answer these questions. I'll just give you one anecdote. We had a SMR bill in Indiana 2 years ago. It was essentially enabling the state to move forward with SMR consideration. And NEI was present. We had a couple of stakeholders from the community. We had a whole ANS delegation of Purdue students, which is terrific to have students at any hearing. And so, we went through the whole storyline of what's happening in terms of the momentum for the industry. And at the end of the hearing, all the legislators go through kind of the explanation for how they're going to vote. And we had one Democrat who stood up, they're majority Republican and they have a Republican governor. The Democrat stood up and she said, I walked into this room and I was ready to vote against this bill, but you all answered every single question I had and you clarified everything that I had any kind of concern about, so I'm gonna vote for this bill. So it was a complete flip based on just one successful hearing. So we only have 7,383 state legislators in the country, so we need to have one-on-one conversations with all of them.
That's amazing. So just to add on to that or peel the onion back a little bit further, how much do you think the diversity in the room played a part in her flipping her vote, if you had to guess?
Well, we absolutely need to have, to Isabelle's point, we need to have the students and the young people present because they're the ones that came in. They essentially said, look, I'm getting a terrific degree at Purdue University, and then I can't get a job in Indiana. So if you build a reactor, I can get a job. And I think that's a lot of the narrative that is Texas is considering right now. So you want to build out the supply chain jobs and the reactor jobs so that the students and the workforce can stay at home. And I think that that's really something that contributes to it. But it's certainly, the idea that you have men, women, young people, old people, everyone was a stakeholder in these nuclear conversations in state houses.
Good point. Thank you for that. Stephen, we'll go to you. Talking a little bit about your perspective on, what's really driving, in addition to all of this great feedback, the U.S. citizen support around nuclear, and maybe even shed a little bit of a light on new build versus existing and kind of what you're seeing on the ground.
Yeah. So, to the point that was made, we consider the surround sound effect. You need to have good messaging, good grassroots engagement, good advocacy and lobbying and policy and all that stuff. And at ACC, we've done it well, especially with nuclear, in that we've built up to be in this era of 60,000 members. And so many of them, when we go on a college campus, we have all of our materials out, and in the nuclear materials is the stuff that they're grabbing. And I think that the shift generationally is really fascinating, but it also has a trickle-down effect to the older generations that do end up picking policy. What we see in the United States about some of the new developments is really exciting. You're in Texas with Advocacy Christian University having their new SMR that is beginning production. There was a lot of excitement around that. I think the attitude that I experience on the ground is people say, we're 2 years behind. In some of the prevailing messaging seems to be, we're 10 years behind, so let's not prioritize nuclear. Whereas some of the messaging is, nuclear is so expensive right now and it's so challenging to get through a regulatory framework. And our perspective is we're not really jazzed up by the idea of just accepting. And I think this is a moment for a nuclear renaissance that we have to take advantage of. We have to be aggressive about. And I think one of the challenges that industry has, really every industry, but one of the challenges nuclear industry has is thinking, we've explained, we have maybe good public relations in our eyes, or we try and engage on the grassroots. And my message is usually it's not enough, and it's not good enough, and it's not done well enough. And so I think there's a lot of opportunity for the industry to really shore up those challenges, connecting with people, making it personal, telling stories, and showing the benefit to communities.
If I can build on that, I think you've got your finger on the problem right now, which is I think public opinion is way ahead, with no offense to folks in the room, is way ahead of the industry's ability to deliver. And I think people are saying, show me. If you can show me a reactor that comes in, in some reasonable price range at some reasonable time frame. And unfortunately, it's a bit of a chicken and egg problem, right? Because until we get the policies in place to make that happen, we're not going to see the large fleet builds that get the learning. And until we get the large fleet builds that get the learning, we're not going to see the costs come down and public opinion change on that. I think public opinion right now, across the spectrum we can see, is willing to cut a lot of slack, but I don't think we have a decade or two to deliver. There's got to be some proof points pretty soon.
And also not to scare everybody in the room, but I've made this point before, and I truly believe it. There were previous nuclear renaissances that failed, and I do have a feeling, this is just a vibe, that if this one fails, this might be the last chance. And so I think this now is a time for the industry to get together and really deliver in the next decade or so.
No, I couldn't agree more. I mean, just look at the people in this room. This wouldn't have existed even just a couple of years ago. So this Nuclear Texas Alliance, this shows that public perception is changing at the state level here. And the origin story of this organization, I'll have to go grab that from Clay at some point, but I'm so glad that he took the initiative to go into a very controversial oil and gas state where maybe nuclear would not be so embraced, even though we do have 2 operating sites here today. And to just lean into that was just so essential. So let's talk a little bit more about really just grassroots campaigning. I mean, if we're having this vibe that this is our last chance to have a renaissance, maybe open it up to the entire panel. What would you guys encourage everyone in this room today to do to walk out, feel inspired, and maybe change on how they're addressing public relations, investor relations, or even recruiting at Texas campuses like Texas A&M and Abilene?
I can start. I have actually one slide, if you all can pull it up. So Nuclear Matters is NEI's advocacy arm. It's a separate 501c4, but completely run by NEI. We are grassroots advocates all over the country, and we are talking about nuclear on all of our social platforms. So we're on Facebook and X, and Instagram, and so we're filling the space with pro-nuclear messaging, so people are seeing that there's pro-nuclear messages on social media. We have grass tops advocates like former EPA Administrator Carol Browner and former Member of Congress Tom Graves to do some of the more high-profile type activities, but mainly we are a grassroots organization. And to the question that was earlier of what can I do to help get bills passed in Texas next year, join Nuclear Matters. So Nuclear Matters will contact you when there are policies and bills that are in play at the federal level and the state level. And so that's everything from hearings to critical votes that we need you to weigh in on. So you just you sign up with your email address and your zip code, and we can link you up with your elected officials. So please join the movement.
I would say I definitely recommend doing that, getting involved there. Recommend deepening involvement with the Texas Nuclear Alliance. From my view, and as we've talked with folks in the industry, like it is almost impossible on a company by company level to have a grassroots presence, right? I mean, you all have a lot of things to worry about other than just having a network of people, which is why these organizations are so important and being involved in them. I think what often gets seen as grassroots engagement is like we send out a newsletter to people, or we post, our company posts about the school project on social media, and that reached some people. But I can't stress enough that unless you're on the ground, speaking to people face to face, putting a bold message behind what you're talking about, putting exciting spokespeople behind what you're talking about, and not talking necessarily about the technology and the things that, as industry people, you're inclined to talk about, maybe some of the in the weeds things. The great marketers are the people who are just putting forward the benefits in a really bold and exciting way. And I think that as an industry, the nuclear industry has to lead with the benefits toward people and show these stories. I mean, my favorite story is when a group of pregnant women went and toured a nuclear facility and touched the concrete that contained spent fuel and showed, like, this is not a concern, this is a great thing. Or when people, over 90% of people who live near a nuclear facility have no issue with it, and they're excited that it's in their community. Those are the stories we need to tell to shore up the remaining support.
I think also we have the students here from Texas A&M that I know have been doing some cool stuff with signs and football games. Things like that, they really do add up. You know, it's small things that actually add up to public perception changing. But I also think, to build on this point, you have to just also show up. In the case of Diablo Canyon, we had so many, you know, the NRC had so many calls, public hearings, and just showing up, being on the call, putting your comments, that makes a difference. If one of these calls happens and they have 20 anti-nuclear people and 3 pro-nuclear people, of course they're going to pay attention to that. So I think organizing around specific goals is very important, and then also showing up, because I think at the end of the day, it's your jobs, you know, that you're trying to protect. So I think everybody should be motivated.
I'd like to just look a little bit ahead, and I think the Diablo Canyon case is incredibly, I agree with Isabelle, it was sort of a very symbolic, iconic fight, and it got global press, actually. It was like, this is the epicenter of like anti-nuclear opposition, and if we can turn this around, you know, maybe we can do a lot more. That said, it was an existing plant, not a new one. Although it is interesting to see that after the announcements were made in Pennsylvania recently, as well as Michigan, you know, the opposition wasn't really there. I mean, even in the Green movement, you know, there were some, you know, the usual groups showed up and said, you know, maybe this isn't such a good idea, but you didn't really see mainstream Green opposition. So I think that's good. I wanted to flag that I think a place where grassroots is going to be incredibly important is in the new build, whether it's maybe not so much on existing sites where you already have a supportive community, but in a greenfield location, you may be back to square one a little bit and doing some of that basic education. Last night we heard about, from Oklo, about the advanced work they're doing with communities. That's going to be really critical, but it's also mobilizing the folks on the ground who can speak to the value of nuclear. And I also agree with the previous speaker that it's really important to talk about the values, not just the technology. That why are we doing this? We're doing it to keep the lights on and to keep costs down, and we're doing it for climate. And the mix of those messages will vary depending on what state you're in, but and what region. But I think that we need to also look ahead and say, if we're going to build another 20, 30, 50 reactors in the U.S., we are going to need to think about the ground game. That might be a little bit different than just preserving existing.
Yeah, so true. We did a 6-state bus tour and leaned heavily on Christine here at NEI to really get an understanding of the state level and who are we going to engage with. And I will tell you that I myself saw public views change from, you know, rolling at this bus into gas stations and having everybody ask, is that bus powered by nuclear? Can I touch it? Which I thought would have never happened. I thought people would just, like, I don't know, go across the parking lot and go anywhere near us. But it was exciting to see so much curiosity that came from it. And I don't know if it was because I was a young woman coming out of the bus, like it must be safe, or if it was something about just the, you know, very bipartisan coloring that we use, obviously red, white, and blue, but it was very just exhilarating and energizing to see that this is not just a bipartisan topic, perhaps here in Texas or on the Hill, but it's actually across the United States, across 6 states that I went to anyways. So with that, let's open up to a few more questions. I think we've got time for, we got 10 minutes. Oh, wow, we were efficient. Is there any questions in the audience we can kind of poll to you guys? And I believe we'll have a mic running around. Do you want to use my mic?
Hi there. So one of the things you guys hit on pretty early in this panel is public opinion has shifted to show me. And I think a lot of challenge remains in creating that narrative, explaining the progress that is being made. There is a lot that we can show before the construction of an actual facility. A lot that can change that opinion and demonstrate success. What are your guys' thoughts on how we create that narrative now?
I'll take a shot at that. I mean, I think it's a tough demonstration right now. Vodal is on everyone's mind, right? Whenever you engage someone who's informed on this, they'll say, you know, whatever it was, $15,000 per kilowatt. I mean, that's not going to hunt, right? So I think it does require a little explanation. Like actually, Unit 4 was 30% cheaper than Unit 3, and the cost curve opportunity is there. We often point to the progress that's been made in other locations, like the UAE, where you build a 4-pack and you get a very reasonable cost. But we have to reason by analogy right now. Frankly, and that's why I say we're kind of in a difficult spot right now, that until we build at scale and get down the cost curve, I'm not sure there's a knock-dead argument on that. But we do have evidence that it can be done when we apply. So I think that's got to be the narrative, and the other part of the narrative is, here are the specific things we're doing to get costs down. So it's not a slam dunk argument right now, but I'm old enough to remember the early days of renewable deployment, when everyone saw these, $10,000, $20,000 wind machines, per kilowatt, and they're like, are you kidding me? This is a toy, and that was the argument we were getting. Well, what happened is we had a lot of policy that created a lot of demand that drove the costs down. So I think we have to reason a little bit by analogy here, but I think there's a lot of goodwill and a desire to cut some slack here and say there actually is a ramp-up period. And that's usually a kind of a persuasive point I've found with folks, unless they're absolutely die hard and they're just clinging on to any argument to be negative.
I do think that's key in terms of framing it as an investment. It's an investment in the technology. It's an investment in the advancement of the technology. To that point, but also to the point that the energy space right now, it is not a level playing field. I mean, let's not pretend that we're on a level playing field with even, other forms of clean energy or oil and gas. And so there are severe regulatory things standing in the way. There's an imbalance of subsidies and credits. And so I think being realistic about that as well, there is some slack that needs to be cut.
And I'll just add that I think a big component of this is the transparency of what these projects are and what they're bringing to a community. I mean, TerraPower took years talking to their community and communities before they decided on which one they were going to go to and settled on that location. But it's important to provide, whether it be public hours where members of the public can ask you questions, or some kind of information center where people can go and find out information, some 101 sessions constantly. It's not a one and done. You have to be doing this constantly as these projects are evolving. So transparency has got to be a big component of it.
Another question?
Thank you. I'm a little hoarse, but maybe for Christine or Armond. Hi, Liz Dalton. We've talked a lot about the deployment and focus on reactors as part of this conversation. We've talked a lot about the costs associated with reactors. I wonder what your take is on states and community leaders understanding the importance of a domestic supply chain, and what types of incentives need to go into that as well if we're going to deploy at scale.
Yeah, that's a message that we need to carry better. I think that even Texas right here, you guys are doing a terrific job with the working group recommendations, but part of the conversation here is, I'm sitting here thinking about all these great recommendations, and I'm thinking about also, okay, Tennessee has this one also, and Virginia also has a couple of these recommendations, but it's not a competition amongst the states. The real competition here is with Russia and China. And we don't want to lose out on that battle. So we need to embed into our narrative that this is not a competition with America. We need to deploy everywhere here. We need the supply chain here. We need everything here so that we're in control of it.
Hi, I'm John Kutch from the Thorium Energy Alliance. I'd like to ask you guys what you are doing right now to do things like restart the build at VC Summer, or get Palisades, help get Palisades back up and running, or a real stretch goal would be to put the last 4 reactors at Diablo Canyon. It's still licensed to have 6 reactors. That seems like a really good opportunity to, keep moving the ball down the field. So I just want to know what you guys are doing right now.
So believe it or not, there actually is a conversation in California about that. It may be kind of fringe right now, but there are legislators who have raised that issue, and you're right, there are existing licenses. I'm completely serious. I sit on the board of something called the California Foundation for the Economy and the Environment, which is labor, tech, and environmental interests. And, you know, I think the Diablo experience is like, yeah, we actually need something dispatchable on the system, and, you know, otherwise it's just going to be gas forever. And so you know, it may sound strange, but there actually is a conversation about what would we build, where would we build, maybe in Nevada actually, and then just run a wire across. But, you know, nonetheless, there's an open conversation. But seriously, there, in addition to the California example, I think there's obviously a lively discussion that we're certainly involved in terms of state policies and federal policies of trying to look at existing sites where you saw that DOE came out with what I thought was a very conservative estimate. They said something like 60 gigawatts of additional build capacity at existing sites. They admitted it was a bit of a flyover study, but I looked at their New York data and I said, that's off by a factor of 2. It's a factor of 2 low. So I think there's a lot of focus on many sites and building on existing sites and doubling up. I know that's been the discussion in Texas. Obviously, Comanche and South Texas would be logical first build places. The other thing that we've looked at but haven't activated a lot on is existing coal sites or retiring coal sites where there's transmission water and generally a supportive community of. So that's all in progress right now. And you know, again, I think it's the same problem with Greenfield, which is you know, who's going to bear the risk? How are we going to control the costs? It's the same set of issues, I think. But we're definitely prioritizing looking at where there's an existing footprint.
And I also think, just to build on what Armond said, in the coal to nuclear conversion, it's actually a great opportunity for grassroots, because you can go to these coal communities and get them excited about, you know, revitalizing their entire community instead of shutting down. Even if you switch from coal to renewables, you know, barely does anything in terms of the workers and so on. So I think that's a huge opportunity for grassroots engagement as well. And Diablo Canyon, yeah, for now we're just trying to get it licensed for 20 years. But then we'll talk about building the other reactors they are not licensed, but they could be licensed.
Well, I'll say that Michigan is a terrific state to watch if you wanted to see, you know, some exciting stuff next year as well. So they have already put in $300 million in their state budget for Holtec's reactivation of Palisades. $300 million is like unheard of for like a state to give for nuclear. I mean, that's just it's a lot of money. And even for reactivation. So, and it's not tethered to any kind of directive or anything. This is just for them to use for capital investments or workforce development or whatever they need to do. They've already started hiring, I think, there's maybe 100 new people that they've hired on site, so they're certainly investing in that reactivation. So it's a very exciting time for that state to rally around that reactivation. And then VC Summer, I know that there were legislative hearings the last couple of weeks on kind of the state's going through a state energy process right now, and legislators, they took a delegation out to the VC Summer site and they looked at it and kind of, not that they're the right ones to assess it, but they essentially said this is worth something. This is something of value to the state of South Carolina, so we should go back and do more with it. So they came back to the legislative hearing and they essentially decided they're going to study if they have enough of the assets there to move forward with it. So we will expect legislation next year from South Carolina on that study.
Great question. Thank you so much. With that, I want to thank you guys so much again for your undivided attention. Thank you to our panelists. Let's give them a round of applause.